The day my son looked me in the eye and said, "You'll walk out of that lawyer's office with nothing," old man, was the same day I decided to stop explaining myself to anyone. I remember standing in the driveway of the house I had built with my own hands, not metaphorically, but literally, nail by nail, weekend by weekend, back when my knees still cooperated and my hair was still mostly brown. My son Marcus stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, wearing a shirt that cost more than my first car, and he smiled at me the way you smile at someone you've already decided doesn't matter. I drove home to my apartment on Clover Street, sat down at my old desk, and I looked at the folder I had kept for 31 years. Then I made myself a cup of coffee, and I waited. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Raymond Holt. I'm 63 years old. I spent the better part of my adult life building something that mattered, and then I spent the rest of it watching someone else take credit for it. That sounds bitter. I'm not bitter. I'm just precise. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the son of a machinist who believed that the only honest thing a man could do was make something real, something you could hold, something that worked. My father built engine parts. I built software. Different materials, same philosophy. You put in the work, you do it right. You don't cut corners, and you don't lie about what you made. I met my ex-wife Patricia at Ohio State in 1984. She was studying business administration. I was finishing my computer science degree and spending most of my nights in the university lab running code on machines that took up entire rooms. Patricia was sharp, organized, and she had a way of walking into a room that made people pay attention. I was in love with her inside of 3 months. We were married by the time I was 24. The idea for Bridgepoint Systems came to me in 1989. I was working a decent job at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, writing inventory management software, and I kept running into the same problem. Logistics companies were drowning in paper. Truck routes, warehouse intake, delivery windows, all of it tracked by hand or on systems that didn't talk to each other. I thought I could fix that. I believed, with the particular kind of confidence that only a 28-year-old man with no mortgage and a lot of free time can muster, that I could build something that would connect all of it. I started writing the framework in our spare bedroom. Patricia would come in sometimes and bring me coffee and ask how it was going. I'd show her printouts, diagrams, logic trees. She'd nod and ask good questions. She understood the business side of things in a way I didn't, and she helped me think through what a company like this would need to look like to attract real clients. We were a team. That's what I believed. That's what I told people for years. By 1991, I had a working prototype. By 1992, we had incorporated Bridgepoint Systems LLC with both of our names on the founding documents. Patricia handled client outreach and operations. I handled the product. We each owned 50%. We had 2 employees, a rented office on the second floor of a building that smelled like old carpet, and 1 client who paid us just enough to keep the lights on. By 1997, we had 43 employees, offices in Columbus and Cincinnati, and contracts with 7 of the top 20 logistics firms in the Midwest. The software I had written in that spare bedroom had become something real, something that worked, something that mattered. Our son Marcus was born in 1993, right in the middle of the hardest growth years. I missed things. I know I missed things. Birthday dinners where I called from the office. Little League games where I showed up in the 3rd inning still carrying a briefcase. I was building something and I told myself that was for him, for us, for the family. I believed that then. I'm less certain now. Patricia was good at running the business side of Bridgepoint. I want to be fair about that. She was organized, she was persuasive with clients, and she managed people well. But over time, the way the company presented itself began to shift. In the early years, every pitch deck I saw described Bridgepoint as co-founded by Raymond and Patricia Holt. By 2001, the language had quietly changed to founded by Patricia Holt, with technology developed by her team. I noticed. I mentioned it. Patricia said it was cleaner messaging, easier for clients to understand, one face for the company. I was the technical guy. Let her handle positioning. I went back to my code. Our marriage ended in 2004. I won't go into all of it because some things belong to us and not to anyone else. But I will say that by the time we sat down with the divorce attorneys, I had already spent 3 years feeling like a guest in my own company. The divorce settlement gave Patricia operational control of Bridgepoint. My 50% ownership stake was converted into a minority position as part of the agreement, 12% of the company's total shares, non-voting, with a buyout clause that Patricia's attorney had written so carefully that exercising it was nearly impossible. I signed it. I was exhausted and I wanted out. My own attorney told me I was leaving money on the table. I told him I understood. I didn't fight. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Dayton, and I went back to doing what I knew. I took a position as a senior developer at a small firm. I coached Marcus's basketball team for 2 seasons until he told me he'd rather I didn't come to the games because it was awkward. He was 13. I thought it was a phase. I kept showing up anyway until he stopped speaking to me for 3 weeks, and then I stopped going. Some things you do for the child, not for yourself. Patricia remarried in 2007. Her new husband, Gerald, was an investment banker from Cleveland. He wore expensive watches and had very white teeth, and he moved into the house that I had built with my own hands. Marcus seemed to like him a great deal. By the time Marcus was in high school, he referred to Gerald as my dad in conversation, and referred to me, when he referred to me at all, as Raymond. I kept my 12%. I watched Bridgepoint grow. By 2015, the company had expanded nationally and been valued at somewhere north of $60 million. I received quarterly statements showing my minority share. I received no dividends. The buyout clause remained impossible to trigger, but I kept the shares, and I kept the folder on my desk, and I kept my mouth shut, because I had learned that some things require patience rather than noise. Marcus called me on a Tuesday in March, about 2.5 years ago. I hadn't heard from him in 4 months, which was about average for us by then. He was 30 years old, working in finance in Chicago, and he had his mother's sharpness and his stepfather's certainty. He told me that Patricia had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The prognosis was not good. I sat with that for a moment. Whatever had passed between Patricia and me over the years, she was the mother of my son, and she had once been the person I planned my whole life around. I asked Marcus how she was doing. He said she was managing. I asked if there was anything I could do. He said no. Then he said something I've thought about every day since. He said, "I just want you to know that Mom has her affairs in order, and whatever you might be thinking, whatever you imagine you're owed, you should know that I've already spoken to her attorney. Your shares are essentially worthless. The buyout clause expired last year. You'll get nothing from any of this. I just thought you should hear that from me." I asked him why he felt the need to tell me that. He said, "Because you've always had this look, like you're waiting for something. I wanted you to stop waiting." I told him I appreciated the call. Then I hung up, and I sat in my apartment on Clover Street for a long time. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, because no one had told him, and I had never brought it up, was what was in my folder. When Patricia and I incorporated Bridgepoint Systems in 1992, I had done something that, at the time, seemed like basic professional habit. Every piece of foundational code I wrote, I documented. Not just the code itself, but the development logs, the design architecture notes, the original patent filings. I filed 3 software patents between 1991 and 1994. The patents were filed under my name as inventor, with Bridgepoint Systems listed as the assignee. Standard practice. The divorce agreement had addressed the company equity, but it had said nothing specific about the underlying intellectual property, because in 2004, those patents were considered legacy assets with minimal remaining commercial value. What no one had reassessed, apparently, was the question of what happened when the core routing and logistics architecture I had patented in 1993 was still the foundational system running inside every version of Bridgepoint software, including the version they had licensed to 14 national clients as of last year. I had known this for a while. I had also known something else, something I had discovered about 8 months before Marcus's call, which was that Bridgepoint had entered into licensing negotiations with a major supply chain company out of Dallas called Meridian Logistics Group. The deal was reported in an industry newsletter I still subscribe to out of old habit. The licensing fee being discussed was substantial, and the IP being licensed was built directly on the framework I had patented 30 years ago. I hadn't done anything with this information yet. I had simply put the newsletter clipping in my folder, next to my original patent documentation, next to the development logs I had kept in 3-ring binders since 1991, and I had gone on with my life. I wasn't waiting for revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was waiting for clarity. There's a difference. 2 months after Marcus's call, I received a letter from a law firm in Columbus I didn't recognize. The letter was brief. It informed me that I had been named in Patricia's estate documents, and that the firm would like to schedule a meeting at my earliest convenience to discuss a matter of some complexity. I called the number on the letterhead. The attorney's name was Sandra Okafor. She had a calm, precise voice, and she said she couldn't discuss details by phone. I drove to Columbus on a Thursday morning in late May. I wore a clean shirt. I brought my folder. Sandra Okafor was a woman in her early 50s, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. Her office had good light and stacks of organized files and absolutely no unnecessary furniture. She shook my hand and she told me to sit down. She told me that Patricia had passed away 6 weeks earlier. I had known this. Marcus had texted me the date of the funeral with a follow-up text saying that it would be better for everyone if I didn't attend. I had sent flowers and stayed home. Sandra placed a document on the desk between us. She said she wanted to explain the situation carefully because it was not straightforward. Patricia's primary estate had been divided between Marcus and a few charitable organizations. Her share of Bridgepoint stock, the controlling majority, had been left in trust with a board of directors Patricia had named before she died. This was standard for a business of that size. Marcus had expected to receive some portion of this arrangement. He had not. What Patricia had done, in the final year of her life, was execute a separate legal instrument, a document that Sandra described as a formal acknowledgement and partial remediation of original intellectual property rights. In plain terms, Patricia had instructed her estate to pursue a negotiated settlement with me regarding the 3 patents I had filed in the early 1990s, which she had acknowledged in this document were foundational to Bridgepoint's current product line and the pending Meridian licensing deal. The settlement she had proposed and pre-authorized her estate to offer was 15% of the Meridian licensing revenue in perpetuity, plus a formal public acknowledgement in all company materials going forward that Bridgepoint Systems had been co-founded by Raymond Holt, and that the core architecture was his original work. The Meridian deal, Sandra told me quietly, was expected to generate somewhere between $4 and $6 million annually for the next decade. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked Sandra if she could give me a minute. She said of course and stepped out. I opened my folder and I looked at the first page of my 1,993 patent filing, which had my name on it in plain black type. Inventor. Raymond Carl Holt. I had looked at that page probably 100 times over the years. It had never made me feel what it made me feel that morning. What I felt, if I'm being honest, was not triumph. It was something closer to grief. For all the years that name had sat in a filing cabinet while someone else took the curtain calls. For the birthday dinners I missed, and the Little League games I left early, and the marriage I couldn't save, all in service of building something that had then been quietly reassigned to someone else's story. Sandra came back in and I told her I needed to consult my own attorney before signing anything. She said that was completely reasonable. She also said there was one more thing. She handed me an envelope. My name was written on the front in handwriting I recognized immediately, though I hadn't seen it in many years. Patricia's handwriting. Careful, slightly slanted, the capital R looped in a particular way she'd always done. I didn't open it in the office. I thanked Sandra, shook her hand, and drove to a park on the east side of Columbus, where Marcus and I used to feed the ducks when he was small. I sat on a bench, and I opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten. I'm not going to share all of it here, because some of it belongs to Patricia, and to me, and not to anyone else. But she said this, that she had told herself for years that what she'd done with the company's story was just smart positioning, that the technology was real, but the brand was hers, and those were different things. She said she had believed that long enough that it became easy not to question it. She said watching Marcus become the person he became dismissive, Certain, convinced that success was simply a birthright, had made her look more carefully at what she had modeled for him. She said she was sorry, not in a small way. In the specific, detailed way that people are sorry when they've had time to think about it and they know they won't have more time after this. She said she had told Marcus the truth 2 weeks before she died. She had sat him down and told him that his father had built Bridgepoint's core product, that she had allowed history to be written in a way that wasn't accurate, that the contempt he had for me was built on a story she had let him believe, and that was her fault, and she was sorry for it. She said she didn't know how he had taken it. She wrote the letter before she knew. I folded the letter, and I sat on that bench for a long time. The ducks were still there. The pond looked exactly the same. I had my attorney review the estate's offer. She told me the terms were fair, possibly even generous, and that my patent documentation was solid enough that I likely could have pursued more through litigation. I told her I wasn't interested in litigation. I accepted the estate's offer. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize with a Chicago area code. I almost didn't answer it. It was Marcus. He didn't say hello. He said, "I owe you an apology, and I don't know how to give you one, so I'm going to start with this phone call and figure out the rest as I go." I said that sounded like a reasonable plan. He said he didn't know how to reconcile the version of me he had built in his head, the quiet, ineffectual man who had let everything slip through his fingers, with the person who had actually built the thing his mother had spent 30 years running. He said it made him feel like the ground he was standing on had shifted. I told him I understood that feeling. I told him I had felt it too, in the other direction, for a long time. He asked if I would be willing to meet him for lunch the next time he was in Ohio. I said yes. We met at a diner outside of Columbus on a Saturday in August. He was late, which is something he has always been, since he was a teenager. He sat down across from me, and he looked tired, and something around his eyes reminded me, so sharply, it hurt a little, of what he had looked like at 8 years old. We talked for 3 hours. We didn't resolve 30 years of distance in an afternoon. You can't do that, and I think both of us knew it. But we talked honestly, which is something we had never really done before. He asked me about the early days of Bridgepoint. I told him the whole story, not the version shaped by time or positioning, just what actually happened, the spare bedroom and the carpeted office, and the sleepless nights and the two of us when we were young and believed in it. He listened without interrupting, which I had not expected. At the end of lunch, he asked me something I hadn't anticipated. He asked if I would be willing to talk to him occasionally, as he worked through some things professionally. He worked in private equity, and there were aspects of building and valuing technology companies that he realized. Now, he had learned from a filtered source. He wanted to understand the other side. I told him I was available. I left it at that. That was 7 months ago. We have had lunch 4 times since then. The conversations are sometimes awkward and sometimes not. We are building something careful and slow between us, the way you do when the foundation needs to be relayed properly because it was never right the first time. The Meridian licensing agreement was finalized in November. The formal acknowledgement of my co-founder status went out in Bridgepoint's company newsletter in January. I received a copy in the mail. Raymond Carl Holt, co-founder and chief architect, Bridgepoint Systems. I put it in the folder, on top of the 1,993 patent filing. My father used to say that the honest thing is to make something real, something you can hold, something that works. He meant engine parts, but it applies. I built something real. It worked for 30 years, and at the end of it, the record was corrected. Not perfectly, not without cost, but corrected. Sometimes the best thing revenge can do is refuse to be revenge at all. Sometimes you just hold on to what's true, and you wait, and eventually the truth does the work for you. I still live on Clover Street. I still drink my coffee at the same desk. The folder is thinner now. I moved most of it to a fireproof box in the closet, but it's still there, and I am still here, patient, precise, and, for the first time in a long time, not waiting for anything at all.